guest on Time Space Visualiser is one of the key architects of the return of Doctor Who to our screens back in 2005. Producer on the series for both Eccleston and Tennant's eras, Phil Collinson was responsible for producing over 50 episodes of the modern series. Hi Phil, how are you?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Yeah. Good. And how are things with you? Are you all good?
I'm really good, yeah, obviously. Trying to survive this pandemic like everybody, and get used to a completely new way of working and living and all of that. But so far, touch wood, so good, yes.
Where would we be without Zoom?
I know, isn't it amazing? I wish I'd bought shares in them though in January, I must say.
None of us had ever heard of it until the pandemic.
I know, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we were all sort of dipping our toes in the waters of sort of on, trying to do things online. And we have been for quite a few years now, in terms of running businesses and shows and things. But we've all been a bit half-hearted about it, really, because you sort of, no, nothing's quite the same as being in the same room. I have to tell you, I love it. I'm post-producing a show at the moment. And it's been wonderful. It's been with Russell actually, and it's been amazing. Where all the work's been done, everything's been done brilliantly, and without having to get on the London train. So I'm chuffed to bits.
Oh, there's some positives that have come out of this then.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's an awful time, but in terms of working, it's been great. Yeah.
It has. Well, we're here to talk about Doctor Who, not unsurprisingly. What's your earliest memory of the series?
My earliest memory as a viewer?
Yes.
I've talked about this. When they did the Blu-ray for the box set of season 10, I was lucky enough to be asked to do the behind the sofa for that. I actually said on that a true fact about myself, which is my mother tells me my first word was drashig, and so I do remember the Carnival of Monsters. I remember quite a bit about that first season, a bit of snippets, but that I think would probably be the first proper memory I have. I mean, it's not surprising. I'd be 2, so. Really solid memories of the show really come sort of I can remember John regenerating into Tom Baker very clearly, and then I can remember that first Tom Baker season really incredibly clearly. So I'd be about 4 years old then. And then it was just, my brother was born in January 1963, so when he was a little boy, Troughton was taking over, and he remembers all of those. And really, it was just a show that we watched in our house religiously. It was a big part of the sort of Saturday ritual for us. And we always watched it, always. And then obviously when I got to be sort of teenager and I had my own TV, and we got a VHS recorder and stuff like that. And then I was able to watch it and record it. And then I became I probably became a proper diehard fan, really, around the time of The Five Doctors. The Five Doctors was the show that really said to me, God, you love this show, and really cemented that into my head.
That was the first one that I recorded off air for Children in Need.
Yes, and me too. I've still got that recording on
VHS. Scotch video cassettes. Oh, a thing of the past.
Yeah. And you had to break the tab off so no one could record over it. Because my mum did that with one. She recorded Dallas over the top of Warriors of the Deep. Can you imagine? And I just lost it. So I then broke the tab off everything. And so then if I ever needed to record, you'd have to put a bit of sellotape over the tab. Do you remember?
You did have to. And I was terrible. I couldn't record in double speed or anything like that. It had to be
No, we never could do that. We had the most basic of VHS recorders. But it was brilliant. And then when I was about 14, 15, I joined the local group, the local kind of social group, Doctor Who social group in Leeds. And there was a gentleman there, a lovely man called Joe Latham, who's no longer with us. He ran that, and he had almost every episode of Doctor Who on VHS. and he very kindly would lend me them 1 or 2 adventures at a time. And so when I was pretty, I was pretty young. I was kind of 15, 16, so in the late 80s. By the end of the 80s, I'd pretty much watched everything that existed. Me and my best friend Carl used to sit in my bedroom and watch them, and hail, rain or shine, we'd be glued to these, and they were dreadful recordings as well. 4 or 5 generations. Remember, some of the black and white ones would be the picture would be rolling, and the sound would be flickering, and you could barely make sense of what was going on. But we still persevered and watched, and we were glued, and we loved it. And so that was the real, having grown up with it and loved it since being a little boy, I then really grew to be a massive fan and started going to conventions and, buying the books and reading them religiously, buying merchandise and being a proper old diehard fan.
I can remember the first bootleg VHS that I saw was The Demons, and it was like,
yes. Well, the first time I saw The Demons, it was black and white. And a terrible copy, but black and white, and as were a number of those Pertwee ones, because at that point they only existed in black and white. They hadn't colorized things, and they hadn't found. I think subsequently they've found a few episodes on NTSC copies, haven't they? But that whole, I remember that whole dawning realization that there were so many episodes missing. There was the particular winter special of a Doctor Who magazine, a monthly as it was called then, that listed it. And for the first time then you were thinking, oh my God, they were missing out. What? Absolutely gobsmacking, really. But I was, it's safe to say I was a proper diehard fan.
So how loud was the scream inside you when the opportunity to actually bring Doctor Who back came past your?
Oh God, I was completely thrilled. I was producing a show for BBC One called Sea of Souls that was sort of vaguely it was a very supernatural show, and so there was some elements of special effects and CGI and things like that. And I was obviously working for the corporation as well, as a freelancer, but working for them. And obviously I knew Russell, and Russell and I, one of the things that bound us as friends was our love of Doctor Who. So, but he'd kept it from me. He kept from me how close it was, and I read the announcement with the rest of the world, and the first thing I did was ring him up, and he said, "Oh, you're the second person." I meant to ask him who the first person was. He literally just put the phone down on someone else, and I was thrilled and excited. And he said, do you think you'd like to produce it? And I said, oh my God, yes. So he said, well, look, it's not my choice. There are various people you'll have to meet, but I'll mention your name to them. And so then I had to go and see Julie Gardner, who I had never met, but within 10 minutes we were best friends, and the rest really was history. And this was not jobs for the boys. I was very, I was young and hungry, and I'd built big shows with lots of set building for the BBC already, so I had a decent track record. It wasn't like they were giving it to some novice. I knew what I was doing, and I'd produced a couple of big hit shows for them, so they sort of knew that on a practical level I would know what I was doing. And at that point there weren't that many people who had worked in the kind of special effects world in this country, and although I didn't have tons of experience, I had enough to be able to know what a green screen was and how it worked, and also, to be blunt, I knew the old show, and I'd read enough, and so I knew what an auton was, and I knew there's a whole sort of backstory that sort of meant that I got the show in a way, that somebody coming in who didn't know it might have not got the show. So you know, I'd love to say I fought really hard for it. I didn't fight really hard for it, but I was in the right place at the right time with the right skill set, really. But I was just thrilled, absolutely thrilled. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was long enough before I really could believe that you know, we were making it again, let alone that I was making it again. But you know, a bit with having such love for the show, and I think the same's true for Russell and for Julie. Having such love for the show really spurred us on to make it the best it could possibly be, and we did. You know, we worked absolutely tirelessly, and you know, really drove ourselves and the whole team really hard to make that show, that first season, you know, the best it could possibly be.
How far into development was the format by the time you arrived?
When I arrived, Russell had written, I think it's subsequently been published in his book anyway, but he'd written there were a couple of sides of A4 that basically said, you know, he's the last of the Time Lords, and his companion's going to be this girl called Rose. And then there was a sketch of, can you imagine getting this document for me? There was a sketch of what the episodes would be, a very loose sketch. So, you know, it's London in the present day, and the Autons have a secret base. The Nesting Consciousness has a secret base under the London Eye. In episode 2, we go forward, it's the end of the world. Episode 3, we go back in time and they meet Dickens. That, you know, just a sort of couple of lines per episode, really. But it was enough for us to start the sort of planning that we needed to plan. You know, what sort of sets were we going to need to build? How was it going to run? Roughly sort of working out how long we'd take to shoot it. And then the script started arriving, you know, a few months after that. So I really sat down in January of 2004. And then we started filming in July, I think, of 2004. Finished the end of the following, sort of beginning of February, I think, 2005, and then it started transmitting in the April. So I was on board, you know, a good 18 months before it hit the screens, really. But there was a lot of pre-prep for us to do, a lot of building, a lot of working out, and a lot of, you know, because we were going from nothing to making 13 episodes of the biggest, most ambitious drama series really that had been made for years in this country, you know, and you know, nothing like it had ever been made in Wales, and as ever, with really not enough money, you know, so it was a tough gig to that first season was the hardest I did. Because we you know, it was a baptism by fire, really, on every single level. It was a baptism by fire.
Were the BBC sort of fully supportive of the project, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, Lorraine Legacy was control of BBC once she announced it, but he's often the way, you know. Jane Tranter was a fantastic supporter. A lady called Sally Woodward Gentle, who worked with Jane, was a brilliant supporter of that first year. They were all really behind it, but like everything, there was a finite amount of money. BBC Worldwide, so you probably know that the BBC has the BBC, the production arm, and then BBC Worldwide are the people who are kind of sales team, really, who then take your show and sell it around the world and make money from it. That all comes back into the BBC. They really were less keen on the show as it was being pitched by Russell, because I mean, I think, again, I've said this before, but I think there's a version of Doctor Who that you could put out at 5 o'clock. It's like some of the earlier episodes of the main show, where, you know, that is kind of very much muted and aimed towards a young audience. That has enough eccentric, brilliant elements with it to bring an older audience with it. Then there's a show we made, which was a 7 o'clock audience that was more sliding towards more grown up, but was still opposite Ant and Dec, So still need to be big and brilliant and funny and vivid. And then I think there's a 9 o'clock show, which is, arguably where the show has drifted sometimes in this last, 5 or 6, 7, 8 years. It's really grown up, brilliant, adult, very adult science fiction, complicated science fiction stories. Now, at that point, the BBC was saying, well, it needs to be, we can see it as we can sell this show, the kids show, we can sell the grown-up sci-fi show, but we don't really know what this hybrid show is in the middle, and we'd steer you away. And when Russell wasn't for being steered away from that, he very clearly knew what he wanted the show to be. He wanted Slytherins breaking wind in Downing Street with zips in their foreheads and all of that. And he was, he wanted, comedy scenes with, the scene I often hold is the scene, in The Unquiet Dead, where, the corpse rises from the coffin and the man owning the undertakers, instead of running and screaming, goes, "Oh, not again." And that was the show we were making. Where you could make where people roared with laughter and were a bit scared, and they could see the spectacle and glory of the end of the world as it burned up. So, I think that was the show, very much the show we were making, a show that knew its slot, that knew its competition, and that took them on head to head. And that scared BBC Worldwide a bit. They didn't really know how to sell that show. And so that first season, they weren't involved, but they soon came on board when the show was a hit.
And obviously formulative as it's coming into production. So, you've got your set designs already starting to come together. I mean, the TARDIS set in itself was just beautiful, wasn't it?
Well, we had an amazing stroke of luck with our designer was a gentleman called Edward Thomas. And he had been working in South Africa. He'd been making a lot of sci-fi stuff in South Africa. He'd made a version of Merlin that Rick Mail did, and that sort of stuff. Brilliant, vivid, wonderful stuff that but he was a Swansea boy, so he came from Swansea and he was just coming back home and thinking about what to do. And so I met him. He wasn't on the BBC's radar at all because he hadn't been working in this country for a long time. I met him and he was just brilliant. He did so much work already on what he thought the TARDIS would do, and again was a fan. We were very lucky with him because he was not fazed by anything, and again, the business of just going from 0 to 60, we literally going from never having made this show before to building and tearing sets down on a weekly basis. No dedicated studio facility. So we were just finding space to work all over Wales, all over Cardiff, really. We were in, 4 or 5 different warehouses and studio spaces, and, all bits of that first season are shot all over Cardiff, all over build spaces in Cardiff. And he, the mechanics of doing it, he was brilliant at. But then he just also had the same sort of sensibility as we had. So he wasn't really didn't allow himself to get pulled down by the detail of, what would a Victorian undertaker's look like. What he did was he gave us a big, brilliant version of what he thought one would look like. And it worked, what would a spaceship look like? Well, it looked like this, brilliant. And he was our secret weapon for that. He was there the whole time I was there, and he was, he was my right hand man. He was fantastic, clever, brilliant designer, and organised the team and just the mechanics of making it. And then on my left, I had a brilliant lady called Tracy Simpson, who's the production manager, who just knew how a big show should run, and did a brilliant job of just managing the mechanics of that as well. So, we had amazing people, and that helped us get through, really. And we laughed a lot. We laughed all the time. I've never laughed more in my entire life. You can imagine, just going from people coming from sort of serious drama background, and suddenly on day one you've got, you know, a small person dressed as a pig in a spacesuit chasing Christopher Eccleston along a corridor with a sonic screen. There was a lot to laugh about, you know, and enjoy about that first season.
And casting was always going to be extremely key to the success of the series, wasn't it?
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. Well, because when it first was announced that the show was coming back, there were lots of speculation in the press about, you know, who's going to play Doctor Who, and the show, you know, there was a sort of light entertainment haze that had gone over the show, I think, in people's memories, certainly in the memories of some of the members of the press, you know. And so I remember reading something that was sort of like, well, Paul Daniels could play him, or maybe Ken Dodd. And so there was this sort of tarnish on the memory of the show, really. And so we knew that we had to get a big, brilliant, serious actor. And of course, when Chris said yes, it was amazing, because suddenly everybody sat up, and what they thought the show was going to be completely changed with that piece of casting. And that meant that then we could follow that up with saying, oh, but by the way, his psychic's Billie Piper. And you know, and Billie's brilliant and a great actress, but was also a sort of, had also been a pop star as well, but you know, was the first girl that we met on the very first day of casting, and nobody matched her. She's fantastic and brilliant and vivid. And so, you know, the combination of these two incredibly people who'd come to acting from very different sides, combined to make a brilliant, formidable kind of pairing in that early version of the TARDIS. So, and Andy Pryor, our casting director, he's still casting it. He's the best casting director in the business. You know, so we were lucky, very lucky.
There was never a temptation, and I've not read this anywhere, so I don't know if you've been asked this before, but was there ever a temptation to look back at what the TV movie had been, and with Paul in the role of the Doctor? Was there at any point did you look back and go, potentially we should look at Paul?
No, we didn't do that ever, actually. And you know, Paul was a fantastic Doctor. I loved what he did, but that would have been looking back, and we just could not risk looking back at all. I mean, we obviously had the Dalek in the first season, but it was sort of different, that, because I think you always need, you know, there was always the Daleks were brilliant and so synonymous with the show that you could not have them. But that was as much as we look back, really. Everything else about the show was designed to look forward. The fact that he was last of the Time Lords, you know, the fact that you know, you didn't meet him with an already established companion. You know, we didn't even think about older companions until we thought about Liz in season 2, etc., etc. So no, I mean, as brilliant as Paul was, this had to be brand spanking new and shiny, and that meant casting, you know, a brand new Doctor. Yeah. And of course, as it panned out, what was, I think, really brilliant about that first season was, you know, kids got to see a Doctor's entire life. So, you know, they got to meet him, see him travel, fall completely in love with him, and then watch him die and turn into somebody else. I mean, you know, as it turned out, that was the most perfect first season to have, really.
We're going to take a quick break, and I think that's a great lead up to how it all sort of came back from essentially what the wilderness years were. In the second part, we'll chat further about that first series and about the impact it had when it was relaunched. And you'll be able to see this second part of the interview in tomorrow's Time Space Visualiser.